Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I know it's morning for some of you guys and very late for some of the others. We got some Canadian folks here, some West Coasters, UK, Australia. So thank you for being with me today. Today we're going to talk about my favorite subject, adding multiple textures to your images. So I'm going to dive right in. So let's close this and open up my first image. So if you've already gotten the notes, thank you. And if you haven't, I know Dave's going to copy my link and put it in there again so you can grab them. They're on sale for just $7.50, and there's all of the images I'm using today and all of the textures. So you're getting like 22 textures and 2 brushes. So that's a great deal. And at the beginning of the notes, and I'll of course mention it now, how to add a texture to your image. So most of you have probably watched me before and know that I work with 2 monitors. So when I bring in a texture, I just drag it from my other monitor. If you're working with 1 monitor, I'll show you in just a moment how to do that. And when you read the notes, if it says add, number, blah, blah, a texture, this will be how you do it. So I don't have to keep typing the same thing over and over throughout the notes. So we're going to jump right in here. So first I'm going to replace the sky in this image. So I've done the basic editing already to this image, and I want to replace the sky. So we're going to go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and I'm going to bring in a texture, sky. I have mine already in here, all of my Meredith images ones, but I'll show you how to bring a texture in if you're not sure, if you've never done that here. So we're going to go to this drop-down panel, and down here at the bottom, you have a file folder and a plus sign, and then if you want to get rid of something, you can trash it. So I'm actually going to trash this one because that's the one I'm going to bring in again. Yep, so we're going to delete that. So we're going to go in here. And if you wanted to just show up here at the bottom of the panel, make sure all of these other folders are closed, that all the little arrows are closed, because if you have one open, it's going to add it in there, and that may not be where you want it to go. So for now, we're just going to click on the plus sign, and I'm going to go to my folder, which is... Oh boy, I gotta make this bigger. I just last night updated to Windows 11, so I'm still getting used to a slightly different layout. So this is the sky I want to use, so I'm just going to double click it, and there it is right there in the bottom of our panel. So then you just highlight it, and it has now changed our sky. So what I want to do with this one, I'm just going to click off that panel to close the selection panel. I want to be able to move this sky around a little. But if I move it to the right, you can see that it doesn't, it's going to see the edge of the sky. So I'm going to make the scale or the size of the texture or the sky a little bit bigger. So I'm going to make it 117. So now I have some room that I can move it side to side. And I'm going to pretty much align it with the upper left corner, because what I'm looking to do is to get all these nice dark gray clouds. I really don't want the blue part of the sky. I just want to get this nice and stormy. And then I'm going to brighten that sky just a little bit. So you have sky adjustments and then foreground adjustments. And these do automatically adjust based on your sky to match your image. I'm going to brighten this just a little bit. Not too much. Actually, I don't want to brighten it. I want to darken it. It helps if I read my own notes. I get talking and then I don't. So there's our sky. We made it a little bit darker. And I always like to output to new layers. And I'll show you what that does when I hit OK. It puts them all of the things that I just did for that sky are now in a folder. So I can collapse that folder, but still access things if I need to adjust a mask or want to make any other adjustments to the sky. That's the brightness adjustment that I just made. And then this is the way that Adobe, masked everything for me. So I'm going to close that just to save space so you can see what else I'm doing. So I want to click that. So I'm going to add a texture above that. And we're going to bring in, so like I said, I normally drag them. I'll show you how to do that if you're working with 1 monitor. You're going to do a File, place embedded, and then it will go, you go to your folder where the textures are. Of course, I have everything lined up for today, and we're going to use this one. So I'm just going to double click it. And now it's brought it in the exact same way as if I dragged it from my other screen. So it puts it on a separate layer, of course. It also includes the name of that file. So if you need to know to go back to it at some point. And it will always match the smallest dimension of your image. Now this one I decided I didn't really want to just stretch it up and down because then it kind of distorted it. So I'm going to not hold the shift key like I normally would to just stretch it down. I'm just going to drag it this way and this way so that it's keeping the proportion of everything in here the same. And it's okay that your texture is off the side. The only time you don't want to do that is if you have a texture with a nice border edge or a darker edge, then you would want to stretch it because otherwise you would lose that if it goes off the sides. So I'm going to just click the check mark to accept that. And then, as always, working with textures, it comes down to blending modes and opacity. So when we go into blending modes, I'll do a quick review. This group are the darkening blending modes, and if you run your cursor over it, you can see what they do. This is the lightening group. And then this group works with the midtones and contrast of your image. So there's 5 blending modes that you'll probably use about 95% of the time. And that's multiply, lighten, overlay, soft light, and hard light. Okay, and I'm going to start this one with multiply, but then I'm going to bring my opacity down to about 24-25%. And it's just a real slight texture, but you can see it added just a little bit of texture to it. And you can always come back later after you've done something else and readjust that percentage if you want to. So the next one, and I'm going to drag mine just to save time. It's less clicks for me. This one I also stretched off the sides. And when you do it, and we drag this, if I hold the Alt key or Option on a Mac and drag it, it will do both the top and the bottom at the same time. So it will save even more time. And again, it's keeping it in proportion. And this one we're going to do multiply. And this one I made about 75%. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I want to add a light beam coming off the light of this train. And I'm also going to use a brush to add what will look like smoke coming out of the top of it. So I normally do not give the actual brushes when I'm doing notes because they're not mine to give away, but I'm going to give you these 2 that I'm using on this project. I've also, I'm going to bring my other screen over for a second so you can see them. So the brushes, I put them into a set, and brushes are ABR files, which is Adobe brush. And I'll show you in a second how to install those. This light beam one came from a set by a site, Obsidian Dawn, and the link is also in the notes. So it's a free set, and you can download the whole thing. It's free for personal use. If you want to use it in a commercial project, the license is like $4. So it's worth it to support the artist if you plan to do that. So let me bring this back over here, and I'll show you how to bring those brushes in. So to add a brush, we're going to go to a brush tool, which I already have highlighted. You're going to come up to the top, and you can see I have a bunch already installed, and I spent some time a couple weeks ago. I had so many brushes and they were so hard to find that I made groups of, from Adobe, the ones you can download from an Adobe site, bokeh, borders, etc., etc., etc. So I already have these in the light category. It's these light beams by Obsidian Dawn. But to bring in a set of brushes, and I'll bring in these 2, and these will automatically add to the bottom of your palette. Okay, which you can see I brought them in already, but we'll do it again. I'll delete this one. Okay, and we'll reinstall them. So we're going to go to the gear wheel in the upper right of your brush panel, and we're going to import brushes. It's really easy. And then we need to go to our folder and webinars. And there is our brush set. It will only show you the ABR files in here because you can't add anything else to the brush panel except an ABR file. So we're going to just double click. You can click once and load, but double clicking does the same thing, makes it faster. So now we have that set down here, and to open it, you just hit that little arrow to the left and scroll down. This one had a double folder, and there's the two brushes. Okay, so we're going to start with the light beam brush. So I'm just going to click once and kind of click off to close it. So that's the default size and angle of the brush, but of course I want it to be facing left on my, coming out the light here. So we're going to open our brush settings panel and make some changes to this brush. So we do that by, I have mine docked over here, but if you don't, you're going to go to Window and go to Brush Settings. So now we can change the angle and the any other settings that we need. So in here, we're going to go to this little rotating thing, and because I have the number, I'm going to type it in. It's 118 degrees, but you would just grab this little thing and you can move it around till you get it. Then I would kind of move it over here. Okay, that's not quite what I want. So that's how I ended up with the 118, was just trial and error. So it looks like it's going pretty much from the right to the left. And I didn't have to make any other changes in here for this one. So we can close that panel. I am going to change the color, and I selected the color out of that area around the light bulb, and it is number ECBD8F. And there, and then I made the size of this smaller, and I came down to like 1200 pixels, and I'm going to use the square bracket keys that are to the right of your letter P on your keyboard. The left one makes your brush smaller, and you can see the size changing up there. And that looked like it would fit pretty well. And we want to make sure we do this on a separate layer, so I'm going to add a blank layer above my texture. I actually ended up putting these below the textures, so we can drag that down. If you didn't want to have to drag a layer, you could click on the sky replacement group, because whatever is highlighted, your new layer will add above that. And if you're dragging a layer, always be sure to grab in the blank area over here. Don't grab in the thumbnail or the name, because then if you double click here, it's going to want to rename it. So just always grab in the blank area. So on here, I want to make sure my brush is at 100%. I actually ended up bringing it back, but if you start at 100, you could always lower the opacity of the layer, whereas you can't increase the opacity after you've done it. And we're going to click just one time about there. And there you go. And if that weren't in the right position, because we have it on a separate layer, we grab the move tool, we can move it and get it exactly where we want it to be, coming off of that light. What's that, dear? Expand it. Yeah, if you needed to resize it, you could do that here. You could just grab the corner and make it bigger or smaller. Good point. Dave just mentioned that behind me. And then we'll say okay. And then I did bring it down the opacity a little bit, so let's go with like around 80%. All right. And then we're going to add another blank layer. And the reason I did these under the texture was so that they would have that same texture over them and blend better with the image. So I'm going to add a blank layer. We're going to go back to our brush tool and use the other one. This is one from a set that Gavin Phillips had a long time ago. Not a long time, but a couple of years ago. He had a whole bunch of brushes, and I have them all installed. And so I chose this one. These were like smoke and fog and different brushes like that. So I'm going to double click that one. And now that one's really big. So we're going to make this one also 1200 pixels. Okay. and I want this one to be white. So to reset your default foreground and background color, hit the letter D for default, and then I want white in the foreground, and if you hit the X, it will flip them. Yes, you could come over here and use the arrow, but I like keyboard shortcuts that I don't have to move my mouse back and forth all the time like that. Okay, so I wanted this to be really dark, so I'm going to make my opacity 100%, flows 100%. Now I don't want this whole thing. I want the skinny part to be, we're going to mask it away. I want the heavier part of this smoke, but I don't want to go off the edge of the page. So I'm going to come down to about there. And this time I'm going to click 3 times without moving my mouse because I wanted it to be a nice bright white to stand out against those gray clouds. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. You can't see the brushes before you use them. Not sure what you mean, Carol. Sometimes I know when you're doing things on Zoom too, you may not see the actual shape of the brush. I don't know why that is. It's just a Zoom thing. Sometimes it actually shows you this shape, and yeah, I can't talk today. Sometimes it doesn't. So I'm sorry about that, but I can't change that. So now on this layer, I'm going to add a layer mask. And now I'm going to go grab a hard round brush because the edges of that smokestack are sharp. And I'm going to make that smaller. And I'm just going to make sure my foreground color is black. And I'm going to zoom in so I can see better. And I'm just going to mask that smoke off of there. And there you have it. So we used something that wasn't actually a smoke brush, but it worked for what I wanted here. And you can see where I masked it off there. And what else did I do? Yeah, Dave said, what else did I do? Dave's like, read your notes. Yes, that's what I'm doing. And then I did bring down this a little bit more. So I'm going to go back. And you can always rename these if you want, because it's hard to see what's on here. So you could just do, light beam. And you could name this smoke if you wanted to remember what's on a layer. And I brought this one down a little bit more to about 71%. Because I didn't want it to be overly bright. It's actually kind of feathered here. Diane says that the beam ends abruptly. But you could even, if you wanted it softer, take a soft brush, a real soft brush, and mask the edges a little bit. Even if you wanted it shorter, or you could just kind of fade it out a little bit more. You could take the brush opacity down. Let's undo those strokes. Instead of at 100%, maybe at like 50% opacity, just a little bit of, brushing over the edges, and it'll make it softer. So, yep. So you can always adjust things. Everything is adjustable. You can do it however it works for you and your particular image. You're welcome. Thanks, Karen. She said the little brush additions help bring the image to life. Yeah, it needed something, other than just, the train is cool. And, we love shooting trains, and especially these old rusty ones. And Dave said I could have done other shapes of smoke as well, because it could be, it wasn't really flowing backwards yet because it's not moving, but I could have made it go wider. You could do lots of different things. This was just my interpretation. All right, so let's get rid of that one. And of course, when you get ready to save your file, you want to do a file save as, and save it either as a PSD or a TIFF, because you want to keep all these layers in case you want to come back and make any changes before you save it as a JPEG. Okay, so next up, we're going to take this old chair, and I have the layered version because I wanted to show you what I did here first. So the original image, obviously didn't have that panel there, so it was a little narrow, and I wanted the chair to sit a little more to the right. So I used generative AI to do a expand the background. So to do that, you would just use your crop tool, drag it out, and then tell it to generate and generate, and it filled it in pretty good. It gave me the 3 choices, so I selected the one that I liked best. And then instead of flattening it so that I could show you this, I just did a merged layer above it. So next, this is at an old brewery that we went to a few years ago, and this was a 3-shot HDR that I merged in Photomatix, and I did noiseless and sharpen in Luminar. Okay, so we're going to duplicate our layer, which I usually do, just in case. And I'm going to bring in some textures. So we're going to bring in this one. And this one I'm going to rotate counterclockwise because I wanted the greenish color up top. So the easiest way to rotate, you can go to Edit, Transform, and tell it to do that. But again, it's more keystrokes, and I like making things simple. So if you put your cursor outside of any one of the corners, you get that curved arrow. And then if you hold your Shift key when you rotate, it moves it in 15-degree increments, so it's easy to get it nice and squared instead of playing around with it. Once you get it rotated, it's very hard to get it square all by itself. So this one I am stretching to match the image. I wanted this red also on the side where the reddish door was, or the door in the wall. And this one I changed to overlay, and I brought it down to about 30%. Okay. And then we're going to bring in, we're using 4 textures on this one. Bring this one in, and this one I rotated clockwise, was fine. And stretch that one. And that one I'm going to do soft light. Again, this is always trial and error. I did do a webinar last year. I think it was around August or September, that where I did not pick the textures ahead of time. I did it live in the webinar because people always ask how I make that decision. And it kind of depends what you want to do with an image. You know, the more you work with textures, the more you'll kind of have a feel for what might work on an image. But sometimes, you know, I try things and I don't like them. And that's part of the process. Phil said, could these adjustments be made in Luminar? If so, how? They don't have brushes. Yeah, you couldn't do the brush work there. You can bring in textures as extra layers. I have done that in Luminar Neo. But you would have to come into Photoshop or another program that has brushes to do that part of it. But yes, I use Luminar for a lot of things. What's that, dear? Oh, yes, Phil, if you can make sure to you type your comments to everyone. He did ask, could these adjustments be made in Luminar Neo? If so, how? They don't have brushes. So yeah, you can't do the brush work in Neo because they don't have that function. So next we're going to bring in this one. And if you notice, there's kind of a theme here. I'm going with kind of brownish tones, which warm up an image, browns and yellows. And they're all got a little bit of grunge to them. They're not super heavy grunge, but they are in my grungy things. What's that, dear? Yeah, in the June conference, Holly Linton is going to do a seminar on the way she uses Luminar Neo. So you might want to catch that. I opened up the conference to registration this past Sunday, and we've had a bunch of people sign up already, so thank you. So we're doing this in at multiply and about 65%. And then this one, I liked the texture, but I didn't like all of the color that this was adding, so I decided to make this texture black and white. So anytime you're using a texture and you want the texture but not the color, we can add a black and white adjustment layer. And of course, I don't want the whole image black and white, so we're going to clip this adjustment to just this layer. And we do that by holding the Alt Option key. And when you put your cursor between the two layers, you get that square with the downward pointing arrow, and you click once. And you'll see this kind of shifted right, and now we have that little down arrow. So that's telling me that this adjustment only affects the layer immediately below it. So I can come in here and we can adjust the brightness of our colors. And I'm going to change the reds. Oops, I have to be on the texture layer though. Actually, I don't. I want to be up here. Reds to 132. And yellows about 67. And then on this layer, now we're going to change our blending mode, or we did that already, to multiply in 65. So if I take that back for a second to normal, just so you can see what the black and white did, by making those changes, I brightened it a little bit. So that was where I was going with this. And then you can, again, there's no blue or green in this one, so we only really need to adjust the reds and the yellows. So I brightened that up as well as making it a black and white. And then we're going to do our multiply. And oh, not on that layer. Got to be on that layer. Got to remember which layer you're on when you do clip things. This is the layer we're actually blending. And then 65. Okay, and we're going to do one more. So I'm going to highlight this layer because I want the next texture above that. I'm bringing this one in. And when you have lighter colors like that and you use multiply blending mode, it's going to, if it were white, it would completely go away. And with this lighter color, it will just become almost transparent in the center like that. This we're going to do multiply. And we're going to bring this way down to like there. Okay. So what I decided to do to make the chair stand out a little bit more is I'm going to add a layer mask to this texture. I'm going to grab a soft round brush, which I'm on, and I'm going to make that smaller. And I'm going to mask some of this texture just off the seat and some of the brighter areas to just make that stand out a little bit more. So we're just going to make our brush 100% and just take some of that texture off. Maybe even do it a little bit off of the back of the chair and a little bit off some of this part of the wood. Just so that that's kind of the part of the image you really want to emphasize. And I might even take a little bit of this dark one off, just off of the chair. So you can always mask a texture to, not affect part of your image. So you're just hiding it a little bit. And there you go. Alrighty. So that's our second one. And sometimes I get asked, what are these light orbs? Well, I would assume that they're from reflections and stuff through the window, but it is an abandoned factory, so who knows? You never know what you capture when you're shooting places. All right, so I'm not going to save that because I already have it saved. So next up, we are going to do this old house. It's one of my favorite old houses around here to shoot that hasn't fallen down yet. Although they've been taking boards off the back. I met the gentleman one day when he was there to feed the cows, because there's lots of cows on this property. And he said that, I said, gee, it looks like, a lot of the boards off of this corner that you can't see back here have been falling off. He goes, well, I've actually been taking some of those off because my wife's been using them for craft projects. So who knows how long this will last. So we are going to, what I did here first, this is the original image. So I did in camera raw filter, I made some adjustments, but I didn't want to change the sky, so I masked that adjustment off the sky. So that's what I just wanted to show you here. So I'm going to merge those just so I have a flattened. You could always flatten, but again, if you want to be able to come back to something, I like to keep the layers. So to create that merged layer, it's on a PC, Control, Alt, Shift, and the letter E. On a Mac, it's Command, Option, Shift, E. So that has combined all the layers below it, which in this case is these two. So now we have one layer to work with. And we're going to bring in some textures. I noticed as I was finishing these projects, I worked with a lot of brown tones this time. I just kind of worked with the images that I had. And this we're going to do at soft light. And left it at 100%. I'm kind of going for a sepia look on this one. So I'm going to use textures to tone my image. Instead of just adding texture, we're going to really utilize the color of these. And I'm bringing another brown one. And I like these that I have with the borders kind of built in, you know, the way I created them. I use this one a lot. Actually, both of these I use a lot. And this one, I decided to flip it horizontally because I wanted this heavier area over this part of the image. It just worked better, and I think I did that after I first applied it, which you can do before or after. And to flip it, we'll go to Edit, Transform, because we only want to flip this one layer, and then flip horizontal. And then I did this one at Multiply, and 74.5%. And then no, I have in here, select the black and white adjustment layer and make it after. That must have come over from the previous project. So in the notes, you can eliminate that step because we're not going to turn anything black and white here because I want the color. I usually copy part of one into the next to just have the format for the images. So you can ignore that. So now we're going to bring in some birds. And I have these in my store as a brush set. They also come with the PNGs, which is what I have here and what you're going to get with the notes. So because they're a PNG file, I'm just going to drag it in just like a texture and it'll be a separate layer. If you were using the brushes, you would add a blank layer and then stamp the brush. So obviously those are much too big. So we are going to spin this back, size these down. I wanted them to kind of be in this part of the image. I'm looking at my finished image here. Kind of like that. Just quite almost to the edge, but not quite. And then I decided I wanted to kind of fill it in with a few more birds. So I'm actually going to use 3 different PNGs. I'll just hit that to accept it. Bring in the next one. These are all seagull shots I took when we lived in Connecticut, down at the beach. And we're just going to kind of put these in between, but have them going kind of the same direction. So maybe about like that. And I tried to not get them like really mushed together, kind of get them pretty much so they were all separated. And then I had 3 larger ones. I don't want them that large, but we're going to bring these up and kind of fill in this middle section here. Kind of like that. It'll be different every time you do it. And that's that project. But by using the textures, because it was almost a monochrome. If this were a brightly colored image, I would have made it black and white before I brought in the textures. So it would be truly, a sepia tone, because you got a little green on the grass, but that's okay. That didn't really bother me. But if you wanted it to be black and white, again, just add a black and white adjustment layer. You can see now you got a really true sepia. and you could, again, this will adjust the tones in the image itself, which you could brighten the grass by moving the yellows and the greens. If you wanted to darken the sky a little bit, the cyans and the blues. There wasn't a whole lot of color. It was mostly foggy, so it wasn't a lot of color in the sky. But that's without that black and white layer and with the black and white layer. So that would give you, the option to do it that way. Okay. Yep, and Don said, good point. If you did have a bird that merged, you could always, add a layer mask and just mask that one bird out. Yep, good point. I have done that in the past. Sometimes, like if I didn't want this one over in front of the house, we could click there, add a layer mask, and we're on black. We could just get rid of, those that were somewhere that you didn't want them. Yep, thanks, Don. All right, let's close that one. And next we're going to do something fun with this one. So this was an old house that we had permission to go inside of. Dave had talked to the gentleman online who had purchased it, the property, and he let us go inside. I don't want to go in there anymore though, because it's really getting pretty unstable. There's like holes in the floor, and some of the cool things in here that we were able to photograph have been stolen, from people going in. Yeah, we did a few of the workshops here, but I don't plan to go in there again and there was lots of poison ivy around the entryway, so safer not to go in. But so this one there was like a big, I don't know, cupboard door or something, dark door, like leaning against the wall here. And I used generative AI to get rid of that. And also there were some objects on the shelf, and I used generative AI to just remove those. So you can always use, that kind of stuff to get rid of things that you don't want in a picture. So this one, I thought the inside was pretty cool. I didn't like this really bright area out here. So what we're going to do is let's duplicate our layer first, and we're going to add a layer mask. Actually, we're not going to add the mask first. We're going to use the quick selection tool to select the areas of all of these windows. So we're going to click there, click here. Yes, Margaret. Margaret asked if there's written notes in the download. If they're in the third file. There are 3 files to download, and in the third file is where you'll find the PDF of the notes. Okay. So there's 3 separate downloads for this set of notes because there's so many textures. They were large. Okay. So this one is now selected. Yes, this is where I also got a flat tire driving through the yard. So it's another reason I don't really want to go back. So when I selected here and selected here, it also selected this crossbar, which I don't want. So I'm going to make my brush really small, and I'm going to hold the Alt key to subtract from my selection and just go across there. And make sure that one is selected too. Okay, and then when you let go, it goes back to the regular tool. And we're going to select there. And we can adjust them as needed because it selected a little too much here. I'm just going to get them selected, and then I'll tweak them. So it wanted to select everything today. It didn't do that before. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see it better. So we select way up here. So again, I have this set on the center, so it automatically adds to my selection. And instead of coming up here and changing it to the minus, again, a keyboard shortcut, hold the Alt or Option key, and that changes the brush to the minus. And then we can just take away what we don't want selected. And make my brush smaller. And let's see if I can select here, because I want to keep the cross, bars of the window. I just want to get rid of the outside. Selected a little too much over here. And Okay, so that one looks good. So I'm looking at each square to make sure. And a handy way to move around an image, like I have this zoomed in, instead of using these sliders, because again, it just takes more time and you can only go up, down, left, right. If you hold the space bar, it turns your cursor into the hand tool, and then you can click and drag any direction you want. So it's a lot easier and it makes it easier to move where you want to be. So I want to select that part. That one looks good. That looks good. Okay, the rest of it looks good. So now I'm going to use that selection to create our layer mask. So on this layer, and it's going to come out backwards, but we'll reverse it. We're going to click on the layer mask, and it's actually, if we hide that layer, masked everything except the but the windows. So we want to reverse that because we want those window areas masked with a controller command I to inverse. So now we have the checkerboard, which means it's blank in here. So we're going to bring in a different picture in the background. So I want it to be under this layer. So I'm going to click this layer. So when I bring in the next image, it will be above this. And yes, Phil asked if I was using a tablet or a mouse. I am using a mouse. So I am going to bring in this image, and this was from the same property, so it was really there. It was slightly to the left of the house instead of outside this window. And we're going to bring that in. I'm looking at my finished one, see where I moved it to about like that. Okay. And so I want to make this shed lighter because it looks too dark now. I want it to be brighter, like the outside of the window was really, really bright. So I want this to be brighter. But if I do that now, if I reduce my opacity, it's going to become transparent because I have nothing below this layer, and I don't want it to be picking up what was in those windows. So before we do that, we're going to add a blank layer below the shed. So add a blank layer, and I'm going to fill this layer with white. So my foreground color is white. On a PC, it's Alt Backspace. On a Mac, it's Option Delete. So now when I lower my opacity, it won't become transparent. I'm going to go to about 67%. It's just going to become lighter because I have that white layer below it. Okay. And then we're going to add a couple of textures. So I brought in this grungy brunch stoke one. Control-0, make it fit. And see, I was on that layer, so the texture came in underneath of our image. So I'm going to just drag that to the top. Control-T will bring back my handles. And we're going to stretch that out because I want to keep the border for now. And we're going to do this at multiply. Again, that all that white is going to go away when we use multiply. And then I brought this to about 76%. And we're going to bring in one more texture. And I brought in this blue. Don't ask me why I even chose this color, but I tried it and it was like, I got a pretty cool effect. So I see there's a couple questions. I'll get to those in just a second. This we're going to do a blending mode. Is not one of the 5 I said I use most of the time. This one I used color burn and brought down the opacity. And then I moved this texture under the other texture. And that was the look I got. And I just thought it was kind of cool. It really made the chair and the drapes kind of stand out. Okay. So Don asked, why not use a brightness contrast adjustment layer clipped to the shed layer to lighten it? You probably could do that. I hadn't thought about it. This is one of the ways I try to think. Let's try that. So if we turn that off, take this back to 100% and add a brightness and contrast layer and just brighten it. Yeah, you could do that too. Well, Dave said, do I have to clip it? I really don't have to clip it because it's basically the bottom layer because we're not using any of the layers below it. But if there were other layers that you needed, then yes, you could, clip it. Thanks, John. Yeah, that's another way. There's, again, always more than one way to do things in Photoshop. And then if if this was still a little too blue, you could readjust I just like the dark moodiness that it gave to that image. I thought was pretty cool. Just very different. Debbie said, is color burn impacted by fill more so than opacity? Yeah, it's one of the darkening blending modes. So as opposed to, multiply did that, but then color burn did that. And it emphasizes the color more than just the multiply does. Linear burn is similar, but a little bit different. It really darkened it too much. Color burn made it work better with the drapes. It kept the yellow tones there. It didn't completely get rid of, the bright colors. It worked mostly with the darker parts of the image, which is what the darkening blending modes do. And then the opacity really was to lower the intensity of the color because it was like a really blue. So I brought that down some, and you could, tweak that. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Marla. Glad you like it. I thought it was pretty cool. It was something different than what I normally do, which is what I was trying to do today was, just find some different kind of projects, things that maybe I don't always do that kind of style. Okay, what time? It's 1:15. We have 2 more projects. So we're going to open up this cool old school. And yes, Don will be going here when you come down for the workshop. You haven't been here before. Yeah. Well, he didn't ask it, but I'm saying I know he asked me before, so we are going to go here. So we are going to change the sky on this one as well. So we are going to go to our edit, sky replacement. And this time I already brought them in, but it's the other one that I gave you, bring in just like we did earlier by selecting it, hitting the plus sign. We're going to use this one. And I moved this because I have this tree here. I had a little bit of leeway. I moved it just enough to kind of center the cupola in that bright cloud there. But I didn't lose anything because even though the sky has moved over a little, it's behind that dark tree, so you don't really see it. Otherwise, I would have changed the scale a little bit. And then we'll say, okay. Now we can close that down. And then I'm going to add a black and white layer to the whole thing because I'm going to do, rather than a sepia tone, we're going to kind of do a blue tone on this one. And we're going to utilize textures to do that. So we're going to add our black and white adjustment layer. And I'll type in the numbers because I have them in the notes. 83, 76. And again, you find these numbers just playing around with the sliders when you're doing your own projects. And I did a -20 to darken down that sky. And then I came back to, I didn't duplicate this, so I'm going to do that now. Control J. On here, I'm going to use the camera raw filter to make some changes. So filter, camera raw. And I added some contrast. So let's go up here. And highlights, I brought all the way down. Shadows, I brought +29. And then color, I brought the vibrance actually down just a hair. And then effects, we're going to add a little bit of texture and clarity. And this will sharpen up your, not the haze. 18. Stop that. About there. So that's going to crisp up the image a little bit. And we'll say okay. So if we didn't have our texture there in our sky, you can see that's the original image. That's with the new sky, and then our black and white. And now I'm going to bring in this grunge blue. Whoop, needs to go up top. All right, Control T will bring back the handles, the transform. I'm going to stretch that. Now this is one I wouldn't want to stretch off because it does have like that border there. So we're going to change this to overlay at about 80%. And then we're going to add one more. And stretch that one out. And we're going to make this one soft light at like 90%. Okay. No, thanks, Charles. Charles Thurston typed in the chat box, Control-Shift-A is the keyboard shortcut to bring up the camera raw filter. So I'll have to remember that one because I use that a lot. Thank you. I learn all the time too. That's why I love doing all this stuff. Okay. So now I want to create a border with one of my crop shapes. So I need this to all be in one layer. So we're going to do our merged layer. Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E on a Mac. And now I'm going to turn off all the layers but that one so that you can see this effect happen. And I'm going to bring in my shape. And it's this crop shape from one of my, they're also called clipping masks, same thing, one of my sets. And I need this to be under my image. So now when we do our clipping, just like when we clipped the black and white layer to our project in the other, to the texture, hold my Alt key, click between the layers, and now the photo has taken on the shape of our crop shape. And then we're going to, and I decided I didn't want it to be this wide a border, so I'm going to take the shape and do the Control-T to get the handles, and I'm going to stretch it a little bit so that the there's less of a border. I didn't really want it to be that big of a border. So you can always adjust things. Things are never engraved in stone. And then we're going to add a layer below the shape, a blank layer, and then we're going to fill it with a color. I tried it with white, which I kind of liked, so I have white here already. So I'm going to do the Alt backspace. I tried a light blue, and I didn't really like it as much, but you can always play around, and I tried like picking colors out of the image. I'll show you what I did. So I pick like maybe a light blue and do the Alt backspace. That one's not too bad. Some of the colors I chose before I wasn't really thrilled with. That kind of tones down the brightness of the white. So that one actually works pretty well. So that's that one. So next we got one more to go. I'm going to bring in this floral still life. And this is something I did in the kitchen back in Connecticut a while ago. I had the lilac and the grape hyacinths were from the yard. I have some old bottles. And this leaf right here I actually added from somewhere else. This was before there was generative AI, so it was kind of empty over here, so I cloned in a leaf. So let's duplicate that. So we're going to add some textures to kind of accent the colors of this a little bit more. And some of these ones that I use are actually from, I think this one was one of them, from some of my discontinued sets that you can't purchase anymore. So this one is going to be soft light. and about 88%. And then we're going to bring in this one, rotate it, place it, stretch it. And we're going to do multiply and about 50%. And then we're going to bring in this one that's got some writing on it. It's kind of a cool texture. So I don't want to stretch this to distort it. So this is one of the ones I'm going to just make it bigger like that. I held down the Alt key, Option on a Mac, and then you can move it side to side. But I kind of was going for this part to be in that empty part between the layers and the book. The leaves, sorry, not the layers. Say OK. And I did soft light and left it at 100%. And then I didn't want the writing on that book, so I'm going to add a layer mask. Grab my brush. It's on a soft brush. I'm on black. And I'm going to just mask this texture off of here. And let's see. And I also wanted to mask it off the flowers. So make it a little bit bigger. And it didn't have to be exact. I just wanted to bring back some of the color in the flowers from this one texture. And you could always, use a lighter brush if you didn't want that part at 100%. And then we're going to add one more texture that's a border. Dave says, one more texture. Yes, that's what I always say. What will it look with one more? So I didn't want the border on the book, so I'm going to stretch that part all the way down off the page, off of the image. And we're going to change the color of it. So we're going to go over here to our color, and it's going to be B75F89. And it's kind of, I think I picked that out of the lilacs. Say OK. And now when we filled the layer with a solid white, we did Alt backspace, but we want to keep the transparent layer parts of this transparent. So we're going to hold the Shift key when we do our Alt backspace or Option delete. And then I didn't want the texture again off on the book, so add a layer mask and just mask that off of here. And I'm also going to stretch that a little bit to make it a little bit narrower. So let's click here, Control T, and we're going to do that and do that. And there you go. And yes, dear. Okay. Everybody stay tuned for a minute because Dave randomly picked a name from the people online, and you're going to get a free entry to the June conference. So the other thing too, if you wanted to reposition like these writing, now if I move this layer now, it's going to also move the mask, which I don't want it to do because I want to keep the book and the flowers mask. So if you click that little lock in the middle. Now I can click here, grab my move tool, and I could move this texture without the mask changing location. So you could bring this, down or over or whatever. So it's only affecting the texture. And then I'm going to go back to the mask, and I also want to take this off. Whoops. Got to be on there. And I want to take some of that off of the leaves as well. Why is it doing that? I'm going to hide that layer. Sometimes when you mask, it does. Why is it doing that? It's bringing back too much color. Well, I don't like that. I don't know why it's doing that. I'm on the layer mask. Mysteries. Things are never I don't like that. So I'm just going to leave it because I liked it better the way it was. And there you go. And that's that project. Marla says thank you. She learned something new regarding layer mask. Yes. So all you do to relink it is just kind of click in the middle there and it'll pop back up. So Sandy says I was on the mask, I thought. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know. It's still looking a little, maybe it's just the color of it. I don't know when I took away the texture, but I don't like that. So we're going to just leave it. Yep, the color picker is black, so it should be masking like that. I'm not sure why it's not doing that right, but that's okay. So there you have it. And we're at 5:01, so there we go. And our winner is Gail Sorensen. If you're still online, I will send you information on registering for the Zoom part of the conference, but you won't have to pay. And you'll get to join us in June for our next great lineup of people. If you haven't checked it out yet, check the blog or the newsletter. All the info is there and on the website. If you go to the conference page, there's links to each speaker's individual page with their bios and details about their sessions and some sample images. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Lots of good comments. I appreciate that very much. And there you have it. And the recording will be up by tomorrow morning, and I'll put the link in the blog tomorrow, and I'll send out a newsletter as well. So if you'll also get it from the Zoom system sends a follow-up approximately 24 hours after now. It varies, but I'll have the link in that as well. So you'll have a couple places you can grab the link tomorrow. And I hope you all have a good evening or rest of your day if it's morning where you are. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your being here and your support. Grab your copy of the notes. Don't forget.
Thank you again.
Take care, everybody. Bye.